Before there were gods, before there was light, before there was anything at all, there was nothing. Not the kind of nothing you might imagine when you close your eyes in a dark room. This was something far more profound. This was the void that existed before existence itself had meaning. Picture, if you can, a realm where up and down held no significance, where time hadn't yet learned to tick forward, where the very concept of space was still just a whisper of possibility in the cosmic dark. The ancient Greeks had a name for this primordial emptiness, chaos, and from this infinite void, the most extraordinary story ever told would unfold. Tonight, we're going to journey together through the birth of the gods themselves. Not the familiar faces of Mount Olympus that you might know from movies or books, but their ancestors. The Titans who ruled before Zeus was even a dream. The primordial forces that shaped reality from nothing. The cosmic family drama that literally tore the heavens apart. We'll witness a father so terrified of his own children that he swallowed them whole. We'll see the sky itself castrated by his own son. We'll watch as brothers wage war across the cosmos for 10 years, hurling mountains like stones and splitting the very fabric of creation. This is the story of how order emerged from chaos, how the world as the Greeks understood it came to be, and how a young god named Zeus fought his way to a throne that would make him king of both heaven and earth. So settle in, pour yourself something warm and comment below where you're joining us from tonight. Let the fire crackle, and let me tell you a story that begins at the very beginning of everything. And if you're new here, or if you enjoy getting lost in ancient tales like this, consider subscribing and hitting that like button. There are so many more stories to explore together, and I'd love to have you along for the journey. Now then, let's go back. Back beyond memory, beyond history, beyond time itself. Back to when the universe held its breath in the darkness, waiting for the first spark of creation to ignite. In the beginning, there was chaos. Not chaos as we understand it today. Not disorder or confusion or the aftermath of a hurricane. The ancient Greek word chaos meant something closer to a yawning void, a gap, an opening in reality itself. Imagine the moment before a scream, when your mouth opens, but no sound has yet emerged. That emptiness, that potential, that was chaos. But even in this primordial void, something stirred. Because nothingness, as it turns out, is unstable. It yearns to become something. And so, from this cosmic emptiness, the first beings began to emerge. Not born in any way we'd recognize, but simply arising. Coming into existence because existence had finally become possible. First came Gaia, Earth, but not the green and blue marble we know today. This was Earth as a conscious entity, Earth as a goddess, Earth as the fundamental foundation upon which everything else would rest. Picture her awakening in that endless dark, not with eyes opening, for she had no physical form yet, but with consciousness itself blooming like a flower in the void. Gaia was possibility made manifest. She was the stage upon which the cosmic drama would unfold. With Gaia came Tartarus, the deepest, darkest pit imaginable, a realm so far beneath the earth that it would take a bronze anvil 9 days to fall from Earth's surface to reach it. Tartarus wasn't just a place. He was a prison, a punishment, a bottomless hunger waiting to swallow up whatever the universe needed to hide away. Even the gods would learn to fear Tartarus. And there was Eros, Not the chubby cherub with a bow and arrow that we picture today, but something far more primordial and powerful. This Eros was the fundamental force of attraction, the cosmic principle that would drive all creation forward. Without Eros, nothing would ever come together. Atoms would never bond, lovers would never meet, children would never be conceived. Eros was the universe learning to desire, to reach for something beyond itself. These weren't gods as we think of them. They had no human forms, no personalities as we'd recognize them. They were forces, concepts, the building blocks of reality itself, awakening one by one in the cosmic dark. But it was Gaia who truly began the work of creation. In that formless void, she started to take shape, not as a woman, but as solid ground beneath the endless sky. She became the first stability in an unstable universe, the first certainty in an uncertain cosmos. Mountains rose from her flesh, valleys carved themselves into her surface, and slowly, gradually, the concept of here and there began to have meaning. Gaia was patient in those early eons. She felt the weight of emptiness above her and around her, and she knew that she couldn't remain alone forever. The universe needed more than just solid ground. It needed space. It needed sky. It needed the vast cathedral of heaven that would give meaning to the earth below. And so, in one of the first great acts of creation, Gaia gave birth to her son Uranus. She brought him forth from herself without need of a mate, without the joining that would later become necessary for creation. This was parthenogenesis on a cosmic scale, the Earth Mother birthing the Sky Father through pure will and divine power. Uranus emerged as the starry heavens themselves, stretching endlessly above his mother-wife in a vast dome of night. He was beautiful beyond description, not handsome in any human sense, but beautiful as the night sky is beautiful, terrible and infinite, and filled with cold, distant lights. He became the roof of the world, the ultimate boundary, the final frontier that separated the ordered cosmos below from whatever unknowable realms might lie beyond. And there, in that first cosmic embrace between earth and sky, between mother and son, between solid ground and infinite space, the real story begins. Because Gaia and Uranus would not remain content to exist in peaceful silence. They would come together in the first divine marriage, and from their union would spring beings so powerful and so terrible that they would shake the very foundations of creation. The age of the primordial forces was ending. The age of the Titans was about to begin. When earth and sky came together in that first cosmic marriage, their union was both beautiful and terrible to behold. Picture it, the solid, nurturing embrace of Gaia rising up to meet the infinite, star-scattered dome of Uranus as he descended to cover her. Their love was the fundamental force that would drive all creation, the eternal dance between earth and heaven, between the practical and the transcendent, between what is and what could be. From this divine union came children unlike anything the universe had ever seen. Not the elegant, human-like gods of later myths, but beings of such immense power and alien beauty that they defied comprehension. These were the Titans, the first generation of true gods, the rulers who would govern the cosmos before Zeus was even a possibility. 12 Titans emerged from the womb of Earth, and each was a force of nature unto themselves. First came Oceanus, who would become the great river that encircled the entire world, an endless flow of fresh water that marked the boundary between the known cosmos and whatever mysteries lay beyond. Oceanus was both gentle and terrible, life-giving like rain. but also vast and unpredictable like the storm-tossed sea. Then came Kronos, the axis of heaven, the cosmic pillar around which the stars would turn, and Kronos, who would master the constellations and learn the secret names of every star. Hyperion emerged, blazing with the first light the universe had ever known, not yet the sun itself, but the divine fire from which all light would eventually spring. Iapetus arrived bearing the weight of the future on his shoulders, for he would father Prometheus and Atlas and all the great sufferers of divine punishment. And there was Kronos, youngest and cleverest of the Titan sons, beautiful and terrible, and already touched by the shadow of prophecy. The female Titans were equally magnificent and equally dangerous. Thea came shining like precious metal. Rhea brought the flowing abundance that would make the earth fertile, and Themis embodied divine law and proper order. Mnemosyne emerged as living memory itself, for how could the cosmos function if it couldn't remember its own history? Phoebe arrived crowned with the silver light of prophecy, and Tethys brought the fertile power of fresh water to complement her brother-husband Oceanus. But the birth of the Titans was only the beginning. As Gaia continued to labor, stranger children emerged from her depths. The Cyclopes came forth, Brontes, Steropes, and Argus, beings with single eyes blazing in the centers of their foreheads like miniature suns. They were smiths from the moment of their birth, their hands already knowing the secrets of metal and fire and the crafting of weapons that could shake the heavens themselves. Most terrifying of all were the Hecatonchires, the 100-handed ones. Cottus, Briareus, and Gyges emerged with 50 heads each and 100 grasping arms, beings of such chaotic power that even Gaia herself recoiled at the sight of them. They were violence incarnate, the primordial fury that could tear apart mountains or bind the gods themselves in chains that could never be broken. Uranus looked down upon these children, his children, and felt something that perhaps the universe had never known before: fear. The Titans were magnificent, yes, but they were also powerful beyond measure. Already he could see in young Kronos' eyes the hunger for rule, the restless intelligence that might one day challenge the Sky Father's dominion. The Cyclopes wielded power over fire and metal that could forge weapons to wound even the immortal gods. And the Hecatonchires. The Hecatonchires were pure, uncontrolled chaos, creatures who could unravel creation itself if they ever turned their 100 hands against him. So Uranus made a decision that would echo through the ages and shape the destiny of gods and mortals alike. As each monstrous child was born, first the Cyclopes, then the Hecatonchires, he seized them before they could draw their first breath of free air, and hurled them down into the deepest prison the cosmos had to offer: Tartarus. Down, down, down they fell, past the roots of mountains, past the hidden springs that would one day feed the rivers, past layers of rock and metal and compressed earth, until they reached that ultimate pit where even the gods feared to venture. There, in chains forged from the fundamental forces of reality itself, the Cyclopes and Hecatonchires were imprisoned in eternal darkness. Gaia felt every blow. Every time one of her children was torn from her and cast into the abyss, she felt the wound in her very soul. A mother's love is fierce under any circumstances, but the love of the Earth Mother for her children was a cosmic force. With each imprisonment, her pain grew deeper, her anger more terrible. The ground itself began to tremble with her rage. But Uranus was deaf to his wife's suffering. He was the sky, vast and distant and beautiful, but also cold and unreachable. He had solved his problem as he saw it. The dangerous children were locked away where they could never threaten his rule. The 12 Titans remained free, and they were powerful enough to make worthy heirs, but not so monstrous as to inspire fear. Or so he thought. For Uranus had made the classic mistake of every tyrant throughout history. He had focused so intently on the obvious threats that he failed to notice the quiet ones. The Titans might have appeared more civilized than their monstrous siblings, but they had inherited their father's power and their mother's fierce, protective love. And in the youngest of them, in clever Kronos with his sharp mind and sharper smile, that combination was about to prove deadly. The Sky Father ruled supreme in his starry domain, confident in his power, secure in his dominion. But far below, the Earth Mother nursed her wounds and her rage, and she began to plan. The cosmos was about to learn that there are some bonds that cannot be broken, and some crimes that cannot be forgiven. The age of Uranus was approaching its end, though he didn't know it yet. The first revolution in heaven was about to begin. In the depths of Tartarus, the imprisoned children of Gaia suffered in darkness absolute. The Cyclopes, whose single eyes had blazed with the fire of creation itself, now stared into endless night. Their hands, which should have been crafting wonders beyond imagination, hung limp in chains that bound them to the very foundations of reality. The Hecatonchires, whose 100 arms could have reshaped mountains, could barely move in their cosmic prison. But it was not their suffering that would bring about Uranus's downfall. It was their mothers. Every day, though day and night had little meaning in those early times, Gaia felt the absence of her children like physical wounds. Imagine a mother whose children have been taken from her, and then multiply that anguish by the power of the earth itself. Her pain became earthquakes. Her tears became the first springs that would feed the world's rivers. Her rage became the volcanic fire that burned in the deep places of the world. Uranus, high in his starry realm, felt none of this. The sky is beautiful, yes, but it is also distant, cold, unreachable. He had solved his problem as he saw it. The dangerous children were gone, locked away where they could never threaten his dominion. He continued to spread himself across the heavens each night, brilliant with stars, magnificent in his cosmic sovereignty. But Gaia was the earth, and the earth remembers everything. As the eons passed, her pain transformed into something harder and more dangerous: determination. She began to plot, not with the quick anger that burns itself out, but with the slow, inexorable patience of stone wearing away under water. She was the foundation of all things, and foundations, once they decide to shift, can bring down entire worlds. Deep in her sacred caves, in places where the roots of mountains twisted down toward her heart, Gaia began to work. She reached into the very substance of creation itself and began to forge something that had never existed before. A weapon capable of wounding the divine. This was no ordinary metal she worked with. This was adamant, the cosmic substance from which the fundamental forces of reality were made. It was harder than diamond, sharper than obsidian, and it held within its crystalline structure the power to cut through anything the universe had to offer, even the flesh of gods. With her own hands, with power drawn from the molten core of creation, Gaia shaped the adamant into a sickle. Not a tool for harvesting grain, but a weapon for harvesting destiny itself. The blade gleamed with its own inner light, and just looking at it was like staring into the heart of a star. This was a weapon that could unmake what the cosmos had made. When the sickle was complete, Gaia called her Titan children to her. They came, all 12 of them, drawn by their mother's summons through the deep places of the earth to a cavern vast enough to hold their divine forms. Oceanus came with the sound of rushing waters, Hyperion blazing with barely contained light. Kronos arrived last, as he often did, his sharp eyes taking in every detail of the scene before him. Gaia stood before them, the adamantine sickle gleaming in her hands, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of continents. "My children," she said, and the words echoed through stone and metal and the very bones of the world. "You see before you the pain of a mother whose children have been stolen. Your brothers suffer in Tartarus, bound in chains that should never have been forged, imprisoned for the crime of existing. Your father," and here her voice hardened like cooling lava, "your father fears his own blood." The Titans listened in silence, but each felt the truth of her words differently. Some, like gentle Oceanus, were troubled but cautious. They had inherited their father's power, yes, but also his position. They ruled alongside Uranus in the cosmic hierarchy. To move against him would be to risk everything they had. Others, like Hyperion and Kronos, felt the stirring of righteous anger. The imprisonment of their brothers was an injustice that cried out for correction. But they also understood the magnitude of what their mother was suggesting. Uranus was the sky itself, vast, powerful, seemingly eternal. How does one make war against the heavens? But Kronos looked at the adamantine sickle and saw something his siblings missed. He saw opportunity. Of all the Titans, Kronos was the most like his father. Brilliant, ambitious, unafraid of power. But he was also his mother's son, and he had inherited her deep, patient cunning. While his brothers and sisters saw only the impossibility of the task, Kronos saw the elegance of the solution. "Mother," he said, and his voice was silk over steel. "What would you have us do?" Gaia's eyes, ancient beyond measure, filled with the wisdom of stone and the fury of molten metal, fixed on her youngest son. She had hoped one of them would ask, but she had known it would be Kronos. He alone among her children had the ruthlessness this task would require. "Your father comes to me each night," she said, "to renew the cosmic marriage that keeps the world in balance. He descends from his starry heights and spreads himself across the earth in darkness and love. But love makes even gods vulnerable. In that moment when he is closest, when he is focused only on our union, that is when he can be struck." She held out the sickle, its blade catching light that shouldn't have existed in the depths of the earth. "One of you must take this weapon. One of you must hide when Uranus comes to me, and when he is distracted. One of you must strike. The wound must be terrible, decisive, final. It must be a blow that ends his ability to create more children, that severs his connection to the earth forever." The cave fell silent, except for the distant sound of dripping water and the almost inaudible hum of divine power radiating from the sickle. The magnitude of what she was asking settled over the Titans like a weight. This wasn't just rebellion. This was deicide. She was asking one of them to mutilate their own father, to commit an act so brutal and so final that it would echo through all the ages to come. Oceanus stepped backward, shaking his head. "Mother, I cannot. He is our father, whatever his faults. There must be another way." Hyperion's light flickered with uncertainty. "The cosmos depends on the marriage of earth and sky. If we destroy that bond, the cosmos will endure." Gaia cut him off, her voice like the grinding of tectonic plates. "But it will endure under new management." One by one, the other Titans found reasons to refuse. Some were too loyal, others too cautious. Some feared the consequences, others simply lacked the stomach for what would be required. But Kronos stepped forward. He was beautiful, was Kronos, tall and perfectly formed, with eyes that held starlight and a smile that could charm the birds from the trees. But there was something else there too, something his siblings were only beginning to recognize. A hunger, an ambition that burned like a cold fire in the depths of his divine soul. "I will do it," he said simply, and reached for the sickle. The moment his fingers closed around the adamantine handle, power flowed between them. Mother to son, earth to sky air, creation to destroyer. Gaia smiled, and it was both terrible and beautiful to behold. "Then hide yourself, my son," she whispered. "Wait in the shadows when your father comes to me tonight. And when the moment is right..." She leaned close, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. "Show him what happens to those who cage their own children." As the Titans dispersed, returning to their various domains to await the outcome of their mother's plan, none of them truly understood what they had just set in motion. They thought they were planning a single act of vengeance, a cosmic correction to their father's cruelty. They had no idea they were about to trigger a cycle of violence that would consume 3 generations of gods. High above, Uranus continued his stately progress across the night sky, magnificent in his ignorance, beautiful in his arrogance. The stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, the cosmic order maintained its eternal dance, and all seemed right with the universe. But deep in the earth, in the sacred places where power was born, Kronos waited with murder in his heart and adamant in his hands. The Skyfather's reign was about to end in blood and screaming, and the birth of a new age. The first divine revolution was only hours away. Night fell across the cosmos as it had countless times before. But this night would be different. This night would split the history of the universe into before and after, into the age of sky and the age that would follow. Uranus began his descent from the star-scattered heights, magnificent and terrible in his cosmic glory. Picture him, not as a man with wings, but as the living embodiment of the night sky itself, vast beyond comprehension, studded with points of light that were not mere stars, but the very eyes of heaven gazing down upon creation. He came to Gaia as he always did, with the inevitability of celestial mechanics, drawn by love and cosmic necessity to renew the marriage that kept the world in balance. Gaia waited for him in her sacred grove, beautiful, beyond mortal understanding. She was the earth in all its fertile glory, mountains rising from her shoulders, rivers flowing through her hair, forests clothing her in green magnificence. But tonight, beneath that eternal beauty, she carried a mother's rage and a mother's grief. Tonight, she was both lover and conspirator, both wife and destroyer. Hidden in the shadows of that sacred place, Kronos crouched with the adamantine sickle clutched in his divine hands. The weapon hummed with barely contained power, its blade so sharp it could have split reality itself. His heart, if gods have hearts, hammered against his ribs as he watched his parents come together in their cosmic embrace. The marriage of earth and sky was not like mortal love. It was fundamental force made manifest, the joining of 2 cosmic principles that held the universe together. When Uranus spread himself across Gaia's form, covering her from horizon to horizon, the very air trembled with divine power. Stars pulsed brighter, mountains shifted slightly in their foundations, and somewhere in the deep places of the world, new springs bubbled up from nothing. But for all his cosmic majesty, Uranus was, in that moment, vulnerable. He was focused entirely on his wife, lost in the rhythm of creation itself, unaware that death waited in the shadows with adamant teeth. Gaia felt her husband's divine essence flowing into her, felt the familiar stirring of new life that their union always brought. But this time, she also felt something else, a grim satisfaction as she sensed Kronos moving behind them, silent as shadow, deadly as time itself. The moment came, like a held breath finally released. Kronos struck with the speed of falling stars and the precision of cosmic clockwork, the adamantine sickle, sharp enough to cut the bonds between atoms, sliced through divine flesh as easily as a knife through morning mist. Uranus's scream split the night, not a human sound, but the cry of the sky itself being torn apart, a noise like the death of worlds. Blood, golden ichor, the blood of gods, sprayed across the sacred grove. But this was not mortal blood that would simply soak into the ground and disappear. This was the life essence of the Sky Father himself, charged with divine power and cosmic potential. Where it fell, it would bring forth new life, new powers, new terrors. The severed parts of Uranus fell to earth with impacts that shook the foundations of the world. From the drops of blood that spattered across Gaia's fertile soil sprang the Furies, the Erinyes, three sisters whose names were Alecto, Megaera, and Tisiphone. They emerged fully formed and terrible to behold, with serpents for hair and eyes that wept blood, their voices the sound of screaming wind, and their breath the reek of ancient graves. They were vengeance incarnate, born from the cosmic injustice of a son striking down his father, and they would spend eternity hunting down those who committed the same crime. More blood fell, and from it rose the giants, beings of enormous size and terrible strength, born armed for war with spears of oak and shields of stone. They were their grandfather's fury made manifest, his rage at being castrated and overthrown given physical form. From the moment of their birth, they were enemies of the gods, destined to one day make war upon heaven itself. But the most beautiful birth came not from the blood that fell on land, but from the flesh that fell into the sea. The severed genitals of Uranus dropped into the waves near Cyprus, and where they touched the water, the sea began to foam and bubble with creative power. From that divine foam arose Aphrodite, love herself, golden-haired and perfect, born from the marriage of violence and beauty, desire emerging from the wreckage of the Sky Father's manhood. She rose from the waves like dawn breaking over the ocean, and every wave that touched her feet bloomed with sea roses. The very air around her shimmered with possibility, with the promise of passion and the sweet pain of longing. She was the force that would drive gods and mortals to madness and joy in equal measure, the power that would make heroes abandon kingdoms and gods forsake their duties. Born from the cosmic wound of her grandfather, she was both the most beautiful and the most dangerous of all the divine powers. Uranus, bleeding and mutilated, pulled himself back from his wife's embrace and began to rise toward his starry realm. But before he could escape beyond Kronos' reach, he turned back, and his voice, weakened but still terrible, echoed across the cosmos with the weight of prophecy. "You think you have won, my son," he gasped, his words carrying the authority of the dying sky. "You think this ends with me? You are wrong. The wheel of justice turns eternal, and what you have done to me will be done to you. Mark my words, Kronos. One of your own children will bring you low, just as you have brought me low." The pattern is set now, the cycle begun. Father shall fall to son, and son to son's son, until the debt of blood is paid in full. With those words, Uranus retreated to the highest heavens, wounded and diminished but not destroyed. He would never again descend to mate with Gaia, never again risk vulnerability in the sacred grove. The cosmic marriage was ended forever, and with it, the age of his dominion. Kronos stood in the aftermath of his deed, the bloody sickle still clutched in his hands, and felt the weight of his father's curse settling over him like a shroud. But he also felt something else. Power, real power, flowing into him from the severed connection between sky and earth. He was no longer just the youngest of the Titans. He was the Titan who had dared to strike at heaven itself and succeeded. Around him, his newly born relatives tested their strength and their voices. The Furies shrieked their joy at existing. The giants flexed their massive limbs and reached for weapons. And beautiful Aphrodite laughed like silver bells as she danced on the foam-white waves. The cosmos had gained powerful new residents, born from violence and blood and the overthrow of ancient order. But perhaps most importantly, the universe had learned something new, that even the mightiest could fall. That divine power wasn't absolute, that children could rise against their parents and win. The age of Uranus was over. The age of Kronos had begun. And somewhere in the future, still unborn and unimagined, a child named Zeus stirred in the realm of possibility, waiting for his turn to continue the bloody cycle of divine succession. The cosmic wheel had begun to turn, and nothing would ever be the same. In the aftermath of his father's fall, Kronos stood at the threshold of absolute power. The other Titans, witnessing what their youngest brother had accomplished, bowed to his supremacy without question. Who among them would dare challenge the god who had brought low the sky itself? Who would risk the bite of that terrible adamantine sickle? And so began the reign of Kronos, lord of time, master of the cosmos, the Titan king who ruled from a throne carved from a single mountain peak. His dominion stretched from the depths of Tartarus to the highest reaches of the heavens, everywhere except that distant realm where his wounded father nursed his grievances among the coldest stars. For a time, a long, golden time, Kronos ruled wisely and well. This was the age that mortals would later remember with tears in their eyes, the lost paradise when the world was young and perfect. Under Kronos' steady hand, the cosmos settled into new rhythms. The seasons learned their dance, rivers carved their proper courses, and the first stirrings of life began to emerge from Gaia's fertile soil. The Titans took their places in the new order like pieces on a cosmic game board. Oceanus wrapped himself around the world as the great river that marked the boundary between Earth and the unknown realms beyond. Hyperion took charge of the heavenly lights, learning to drive the sun and moon across the sky in their appointed courses. Themis established the laws that would govern divine behavior, while Mnemosyne began the great work of preserving the memory of all that had been and would be. It was a time of building, of creating, of establishing the foundations upon which all future ages would rest. Kronos himself seemed to grow wiser and more majestic with each passing eon. He was beautiful in the way that mountain peaks are beautiful, remote and perfect, and touched with an authority that came from the very bones of the earth. But there was one among the Titans who captured his attention above all others: his sister, Rhea. She was fertility itself made manifest, the flowing abundance that made the earth green and the waters sweet. Where Gaia was the solid foundation of existence, Rhea was its flowering, its celebration, its joy in creation. When she laughed, flowers bloomed. When she danced, the very air seemed to sparkle with golden light. Kronos courted her with the patience of mountains and the persistence of time itself. He brought her gifts carved from starlight and precious metals drawn from the heart of the world. He sang to her with a voice like distant thunder, and slowly, gradually, she came to love him in return. Their wedding was a cosmic event that sent ripples through every level of reality. When the Lord of Time took fertility as his bride, the universe itself seemed to sigh with satisfaction. Here was the perfect divine marriage, power wedded to creation, authority joined with abundance. Under their joint rule, the Golden Age would surely last forever. And for a time, it seemed it would. Rhea proved to be everything Kronos could have wished for in a queen. She was wise in counsel, generous in spirit, and beloved by all the lesser gods and nature spirits who served in their cosmic court. Together, they made the hard decisions that shaped the growing world, established the laws that would govern the interaction between divine and mortal realms, and generally presided over an era of unprecedented peace and prosperity. But even in paradise, shadows began to gather. It started with dreams, or perhaps they were visions, for gods experience sleep differently than mortals do. Kronos began to have nightmares that felt more real than waking. In them, he saw himself as his father had been, proud, powerful, supremely confident in his dominion. And he saw one of his own children rising against him with weapons that could wound the immortal gods. At first, he dismissed these as mere phantoms of a guilty conscience. After all, he had committed deicide, had struck down his own father in the most brutal way imaginable. It was only natural that his mind would conjure fears about receiving similar treatment. But the dreams persisted, growing more vivid and more specific with each passing night. He saw himself being tricked, just as he had tricked Uranus. He saw his power stolen, his authority usurped, his very essence imprisoned or destroyed. And always, always, the face of his destroyer was one of his own children, sometimes male, sometimes female, but always bearing the unmistakable stamp of his divine bloodline. The dreams began to bleed into his waking hours. He would find himself staring at Rhea's beautiful face and wondering what monsters she might birth. He would catch himself studying his siblings' children, for the other Titans had begun having offspring of their own, and looking for signs of future rebellion. Then came the prophecy. It arrived not as dreams or visions, but as a direct message from the cosmos itself, delivered by the three fates who spun the threads of destiny from their cave at the world's heart. Their words were simple, direct, and utterly terrifying. Kronos, son of Uranus, king of the Titans, your father's curse bears fruit. One of your children shall overthrow you as you overthrew him. The pattern is set, the wheel turns eternal. Guard yourself, king of time, for your time grows short. When Rhea came to him with news of her first pregnancy, glowing with joy and maternal pride, Kronos felt the cold hand of fate close around his heart. He looked at his beloved wife, radiant with the promise of new life, and saw not joy, but doom. Somewhere in her womb grew his destroyer, the child who would cast him down, just as he had cast down his father. But Kronos was clever, cleverer than his father had ever been. Uranus had tried to prevent his downfall by imprisoning his dangerous children, but he had left them alive, able to plot and plan, and eventually strike back. Kronos would not make the same mistake. When their first child was born, beautiful Hestia, goddess of the hearth and home, Kronos took one look at her perfect divine form and knew what he had to do. Without hesitation, without explanation, he seized the newborn goddess and swallowed her whole. Rhea's scream of horror and anguish shattered crystal in the palace and caused avalanches on distant mountains. But Kronos was unmoved. "Better this," he said grimly, "than to suffer my father's fate." The child lived, of course. Gods cannot truly die, even when devoured. But Hestia was trapped now in the darkness of her father's divine stomach, unable to grow, unable to escape, unable to fulfill whatever destiny the fates had planned for her. When the second child was born, Demeter, who would have been goddess of the harvest, Kronos devoured her as well. Then came Hera, queen of the heavens, down into the darkness. Then Hades, lord of the underworld. Then Poseidon, master of the seas. 5 children born, 5 children devoured. Each birth brought Rhea hope, and each swallowing broke her heart anew. She pleaded with her husband, wept before him, raged at him, but nothing could move him from his terrible purpose. The prophecy hung over him like a sword, and he would not rest until every possible threat had been eliminated. But prophecies, as Kronos was about to learn, have a way of fulfilling themselves. The more desperately he tried to prevent his fate, the more surely he guaranteed it. With each child he devoured, he grew more paranoid, more isolated, more hated by his own wife. The golden age began to tarnish at the edges as its king became a monster consumed by fear. And in Rhea's womb, the 6th child stirred, the child who would be called Zeus, the child who would prove that some destinies cannot be cheated, no matter how clever the schemer or how terrible the lengths he's willing to go to avoid them. The age of Kronos was entering its final phase, though the Titan King didn't know it yet. His greatest enemy was about to be born, and all his precautions, all his cruelty, all his devouring of innocence would prove to have been for nothing. The cosmic wheel continued to turn, grinding ever closer to the moment when Father would face Son, when the pattern of divine succession would claim its next victim, when the universe would learn once again that power built on fear and murder carries the seeds of its own destruction. By the time Rhea felt the 6th child quickening in her womb, she had become a different goddess entirely. Gone was the laughing bride who had danced with flowers in her hair. Gone was the radiant queen who had ruled beside her husband in joy and harmony. In their place stood a mother who had watched 5 of her children disappear into the darkness of their father's maw. A wife who had learned that the god she loved was capable of monstrous acts in service of his own preservation. This pregnancy felt different from the others. Perhaps it was because Rhea knew it would be her last chance. Kronos had made it clear that he would continue devouring their offspring until the prophecy could no longer threaten him. Or perhaps it was because the child itself was different, touched by destiny in ways that even divine perception could barely grasp. As the months passed, Rhea found herself driven by a desperate cunning she hadn't known she possessed. She began to make secret journeys, traveling to the far corners of the earth under cover of darkness, seeking allies who might help her save at least one child from her husband's terrible hunger. She visited her mother Gaia in the deep places where the earth's power ran strongest. The ancient goddess, still grieving her imprisoned children, listened to her daughter's plight with eyes that had seen the rise and fall of cosmic ages. "He has become what he once fought against," Gaia said sadly, her voice the rumble of tectonic plates shifting in the deep. "Your husband sought to avoid his father's fate, but he has instead become his father, a tyrant who destroys his own children out of fear. "Help me, mother," Rhea pleaded. "Help me save this one child. I cannot bear to watch another innocent disappear into that darkness." Gaia's ancient eyes softened with grandmother's love. "There is a way," she said slowly, "but it will require deception of the highest order, and courage beyond what you have yet shown. Are you prepared to lie to the Lord of Time himself? Are you ready to risk his wrath when he discovers what you have done?" "I am ready," Rhea said, and meant it with every fiber of her divine being. So began the conspiracy that would topple a king. When Rhea's time came, she did not go to the sacred birthing chamber in Kronos' palace. Instead, following her mother's guidance, she traveled in secret to the island of Crete, to a hidden cave on the slopes of Mount Dicte, where the earth's power ran deep and strong. There, attended only by Gaia and a handful of trusted nature spirits, she gave birth to her 6th child. The moment Zeus drew his first breath, the cosmos itself seemed to take notice. Thunder rolled across clear skies, eagles circled overhead despite the darkness, and deep in the cave, spring water began to flow from solid rock. This was no ordinary divine child. This was the one the prophecy had spoken of, the heir who would inherit the throne of heaven itself. But there was no time to marvel at portents and omens. Even as Rhea cradled her newborn son, she could feel Kronos stirring in his distant palace, sensing through their divine connection that the birth was complete. Soon he would come, expecting to claim his newest child for his awful feast. Moving with desperate speed, Rhea wrapped the infant Zeus in soft cloths and placed him in the care of the nymphs who dwelt in the sacred cave. The chief among them was Amalthea, a goat nymph whose milk would nourish the future king of the gods. She took the baby with reverence, understanding the cosmic significance of what she was being entrusted with. "Raise him in secret," Rhea whispered, tears streaming down her face as she prepared to leave her son. "Keep him hidden until he is strong enough to reclaim what is his by right. And when that day comes," her voice hardened with a mother's fierce love, "teach him to remember what his father has done." But Rhea's deception was only half complete. She had saved Zeus, yes, but Kronos would expect to devour a child. If she returned empty-handed, his suspicions would be aroused, and his divine senses would eventually lead him to the hidden cave. So Rhea gathered a large stone from the mountainside. Not just any stone, but one that Gaia had specially prepared, imbued with just enough divine essence to fool even the Lord of Time's supernatural senses. With her own hands, she wrapped it in swaddling clothes identical to those that had held Zeus, bundling it carefully to approximate the weight and feel of a newborn god. When she returned to the palace, pale and trembling with what appeared to be exhaustion from childbirth, Kronos was waiting. His eyes, once warm with love, now cold with paranoid calculation, fixed on the bundle in her arms. "Another child," he said, and there was no joy in his voice, only grim satisfaction. Another threat eliminated. He reached for the bundle, and Rhea had to summon every ounce of divine self-control to keep from snatching it away. She watched, her heart breaking anew, as her husband unwrapped what he thought was their child and prepared to swallow it whole. Kronos tilted his head back and opened his mouth, revealing the cosmic darkness within. Down went the stone, and he swallowed it with the same mechanical efficiency he had shown with their previous children. For a moment, Rhea thought their deception had failed when Kronos paused, a slight frown creasing his brow. This one felt different, he murmured, pressing a hand to his stomach. Rhea's blood turned to ice, but she forced herself to speak calmly. "They are all different, my lord. Each child carries their own unique essence." Kronos studied her face for a long moment, and Rhea felt the full weight of his divine perception pressing against her mind, searching for any trace of deception. But a mother's love, it turned out, was stronger than even a titan's power to detect lies. Her desperate need to protect her child created a shield of pure will that even Kronos could not penetrate. Finally, he nodded, satisfied. It is done then. The prophecy grows weaker, with each threat eliminated. As Kronos returned to his throne, believing himself safe from destiny's designs, Rhea retreated to her chambers and wept. Not just for the children she had lost, but for the god her husband had become, and for the terrible reckoning she knew was coming. Far away on Crete, in a cave hidden from divine sight by ancient magic, Zeus grew in strength and wisdom under the care of his supernatural guardians. Amalthea's milk made him strong, while the Curetes, warrior dancers whose bronze shields and spears created a constant din, masked the sound of his cries from any who might come searching. As the years passed, stories began to filter back to Rhea through her network of loyal nymphs and nature spirits. Zeus was growing into everything the prophecy had promised: strong, intelligent, charismatic, and touched by a natural authority that made even the wild creatures of Crete bow to his will. He learned the arts of war from the Curetes, the secrets of nature from the nymphs, and the deeper mysteries of divine power from Gaia herself, who visited him often in the guise of an old woman. But most importantly, he learned the truth about his father. The nymphs and spirits who raised him didn't spare Zeus the harsh realities of his origin. They told him about his devoured siblings, about his mother's sacrifice, about the tyrant who ruled the cosmos through fear and violence. They taught him that he was not just Zeus, son of Kronos, but Zeus the liberator, the one destined to free not just his siblings, but the entire cosmos from the grip of paranoid tyranny. As Zeus approached adulthood, and gods mature far faster than mortals, his thoughts turned increasingly toward revenge. But this would not be the crude, brutal assault that Kronos had used against Uranus. Zeus was learning patience, strategy, the art of the long game. When he moved against his father, it would be with cunning that matched Kronos' own. The hidden prince of the gods was almost ready to emerge from his cave and claim his birthright. But first, he would need allies. He would need a plan that could succeed where direct confrontation would fail. And most of all, he would need to free his siblings from their prison of darkness and divine flesh. The wheel of fate was turning faster now, spinning toward the confrontation that would decide the future of all creation. In his palace, Kronos ruled supreme, never knowing that his greatest enemy was growing stronger each day, learning the lessons that would soon bring down the Lord of Time himself. The Age of the Titans was entering its final chapter, and the hero who would write its ending was no longer a helpless infant hidden in a cave. He was Zeus, god of the sky and storm, keeper of justice and wielder of thunder. And he was coming home. Zeus returned to his father's court not as a conquering hero with blazing thunderbolts and armies at his back, but as a stranger seeking employment. He had learned patience in his years of exile, and more importantly, he had learned that the mightiest fortress could often be breached not by battering rams, but by a single person walking through the front door with a smile and a lie. The young god who presented himself at Kronos' palace bore little resemblance to the infant who had been spirited away to Crete. Zeus had grown tall and powerful, with eyes the color of storm clouds, and a voice that carried the subtle authority of distant thunder. But he had learned to mask his divine nature, to appear as nothing more than a talented lesser deity seeking service with the great Titan king. He called himself by another name. Some stories say Zan. Others claim he took the identity of a minor river god, and he presented himself as a skilled cupbearer and servant, trained in the finest courts of the distant lands. His credentials were impeccable, his references glowing. After all, he had spent years preparing for this moment, and the nymphs and nature spirits who had raised him were consummate actresses when the need arose. Kronos, secure in his power and convinced that all threats to his rule had been literally digested, saw no danger in this charming young servant. If anything, Zeus's presence brightened the increasingly grim atmosphere of the palace. The young cupbearer had a gift for conversation, a talent for making even the most mundane court functions feel more lively and engaging. He quickly became a favorite not just of Kronos, but of Rhea as well, though she, of course, had to hide her recognition behind careful masks of polite interest. Only a mother's heart could have recognized her son beneath his disguise, and Rhea's heart nearly burst with pride and terror in equal measure. Her baby had grown into everything she had hoped: strong, clever, magnificent in his controlled power. But she also knew that he was walking into the greatest danger imaginable. One slip, one moment of revealed identity, and Kronos would destroy him without hesitation. For months, Zeus served in his father's court, learning the routines of the palace, mapping the locations of power, and most importantly, gaining Kronos' trust. He poured wine at divine feasts, served ambrosia to visiting dignitaries, and listened carefully to every conversation, every casual remark that might reveal a weakness in his father's seemingly impregnable position. But Zeus was not working alone. During his years in exile, he had gained a valuable ally, Metis, the Titaness of wisdom and cunning, daughter of Oceanus and Tethys. She was everything her name implied: clever beyond measure, wise in the ways of divine politics, and possessed of a strategic mind that could see moves and counter-moves stretching across centuries. Metis had her own reasons for wanting to see Kronos fall. She had watched the Golden Age turn grey under his paranoid rule, seen the joy drain out of the cosmos as fear took its place. More personally, she had fallen in love with the young god who had been raised in secret on Crete, and she was determined to see him claim his rightful throne. It was Metis who provided the key to Zeus's plan, a special potion brewed from herbs that grew only in the deepest caves of the earth, plants that had never seen sunlight and drew their power from the fundamental forces of dissolution and reversal. This was not poison in any traditional sense. It would not kill or even harm the one who drank it. Instead, it would compel the divine stomach to give up everything it had ever consumed, to reverse the process of digestion and release whatever had been swallowed back into the world. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Zeus would find an opportunity to slip the potion into his father's drink. Kronos would be compelled to vomit up his devoured children, and then the real work would begin. But first, they had to survive the deception. The opportunity came during one of Kronos' great feasts, a celebration of his continued dominion that had become an annual tradition. The hall was filled with titans and their offspring, lesser gods and divine servants, all gathered to honor their king and partake of his hospitality. Zeus moved among them with practiced ease, filling cups and serving delicacies, invisible in the way that good servants always are. As the evening wore on and the divine wine flowed freely, Zeus watched for his moment. It came when Kronos, mellowed by drink and the flattery of his courtiers, called for his favorite cupbearer to refill his golden chalice one more time. Zeus approached with the wine jug in one hand and the small vial of Metis's potion concealed in the other. His heart, if gods have hearts, thundered against his ribs, but his hands were steady as he poured. The potion was colorless and odorless, mixing seamlessly with the dark wine until no trace of it could be detected. "Your wine, my lord," Zeus said, offering the chalice with a bow that was perfect in its respectful subservience. Kronos took the cup and drained it in a single draught, as was his custom. For a moment, nothing happened. Zeus began to fear that the potion had failed, that all their careful planning had been for nothing. Then Kronos' face went pale. He pressed a hand to his stomach, his eyes widening with sudden alarm as he felt something shifting inside him, something fighting to get out. The potion was working, compelling his divine digestive system to reverse its normal function. Kronos began, but the words were cut off as his body convulsed with the most violent retching the cosmos had ever witnessed. The first to emerge was Poseidon, fully grown and blazing with divine power, expelled from his father's stomach like a cannonball and landing on the marble floor with enough force to crack it. Then came Hades, lord of the underworld, pale and terrible and wreathed in shadows that seemed to drink the light from the torches. Hera followed, regal and fierce, even in the confusion of her sudden liberation. One by one, Zeus's siblings were vomited forth, Demeter with grain already growing in her hair, Hestia surrounded by warm flames that harmed nothing but gave comfort to all. Each emerged as a fully adult god, for divine beings do not age in the conventional sense, and their time in Kronos' stomach had not been true imprisonment, so much as a sort of cosmic suspension. The great hall erupted in chaos. Titans leaped to their feet, some drawing weapons, others fleeing in terror. But it was too late for any of them to change what had already begun. The devoured children of Kronos were free, and their eyes blazed with the fury of gods who had been unjustly imprisoned. Last of all came the stone, the wrapped rock that Rhea had used to deceive her husband so many years ago. It hit the floor with a sound like breaking mountains, and suddenly everyone in the hall understood exactly what had happened. Kronos staggered to his feet, his face twisted with rage and betrayal, as his eyes fixed on the young cupbearer who had served him the poisoned wine. "You!" he snarled, and his voice carried the weight of collapsing stars. "I know you now. I should have known from the beginning." Zeus let his disguise fall away like a discarded cloak. Power radiated from him in waves, not yet the full authority he would one day wield, but already more than enough to shake the palace to its foundations. When he spoke, his voice carried the rumble of approaching storms. "Hello, Father," he said, and there was no respect in the word, only cold judgment. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." The freed Olympians, for that's what they would come to be called, gathered around their youngest brother, and the family resemblance was unmistakable. Here stood the children Kronos had tried to destroy, magnificent in their divine power and united in their purpose. Kronos looked at them and saw his own doom reflected in 6 pairs of eyes that burned with righteous fury. The prophecy he had tried so desperately to avoid had come to pass, despite all his precautions. His children were free, they were powerful, and they were angry. The stage was set for the greatest war the cosmos had ever seen. Father would face his children in battle, Titan would clash with Olympian, and the very foundations of reality would shake under the weight of their conflict. But that night, in the immediate aftermath of the poisoned cup, There was only the terrible silence that comes before the storm, broken at last by Zeus's voice, carrying a promise that would echo through all the ages to come. Your reign is over, Kronos. It's time for a new age to begin. The words hung in the air like a divine decree. Your reign is over, Kronos. It's time for a new age to begin. In that moment, standing in the shadow of Mount Othrys where Kronos held his court, the 6 freed Olympians faced their father with the terrible certainty of prophecy fulfilled. The Titan king looked upon his children, children he had devoured in their infancy, children who now stood before him as fully grown gods, radiating power and righteous fury. And perhaps, for the first time in eons, Kronos felt the cold touch of fear. What followed was not a mere succession of power. This was war, the Titanomachy, the conflict that would literally shake the foundations of creation itself. For 10 long years, the cosmos would become a battlefield where gods wielded forces that could unmake reality. Zeus did not stand alone. His newly freed siblings, Poseidon, Hades, Hera, Demeter, and Hestia, rallied to his cause with the desperate fury of those who had spent their first breaths in the crushing darkness of their father's stomach. Each had emerged from Kronos fully grown, bearing divine powers that had been fermenting in that terrible prison. Poseidon commanded the seas, turning them into weapons of unimaginable destruction. Tidal waves rose like moving mountains, and ocean depths became yawning mouths that could swallow entire islands. Hades brought with him the cold certainty of death itself, his presence withering the very air around him. The sisters, Hera with her regal authority, Demeter with dominion over all growing things, and gentle Hestia with her sacred flames, each added their own terrible majesty to Zeus's cause. But Kronos had ruled for eons. He commanded the loyalty of most Titans, those primordial forces who had shaped the world from its very beginning. Oceanus, the world river that encircled all existence. Hyperion, who carried the fire of the sun itself. Themis, the embodiment of divine law. Mnemosyne, keeper of all memory. Atlas, whose strength could bear the weight of the heavens. The battle lines were drawn across a cosmos that had never known such violence. Zeus made a crucial decision, one that would define not just this war, but the very nature of his future rule. He descended into the pit of Tartarus, that place of ultimate imprisonment where his grandfather Uranus had banished the Cyclopes and the Hecatonchires so long ago. The realm of Tartarus was darkness made manifest, a place where even the concept of light seemed foreign. Here, the very air pressed down like molten lead, and the ground beneath his feet pulsed with malevolent life. Zeus walked through this nightmare realm, following the sounds of massive hammers striking divine metal. He found the Cyclopes first, Brontes, Steropes, and Arges, the one-eyed giants whose single eyes blazed like forge fires in the eternal darkness. For countless ages they had labored here, creating wonders and weapons for their own amusement, their incredible skills wasted in exile. "Uncle," Zeus called out, his voice carrying clearly through the oppressive air. "I offer you freedom and alliance." The hammering stopped. 3 massive heads turned toward him, 3 great eyes studying this young god who dared enter their prison. "Freedom?" Brontes, the eldest, spoke with a voice like grinding stone. "What freedom can you offer that we cannot take ourselves, young Zeus?" "The freedom to create without limit," Zeus replied, "to forge weapons and wonders for gods who will honor your craft, to see your works wielded in the light of day, not hidden in this pit of despair. What passed between them in that moment was more than negotiation. It was recognition. The Cyclopes saw in Zeus something different from Uranus, different from Kronos. Here was a god who understood that true power came not from fear, but from alliance. They forged for him weapons that would become legend. Zeus received the thunderbolt, not merely lightning, but the very essence of the storm given form, a weapon that could split mountains and pierce the heavens themselves. For Poseidon, they crafted the trident, a weapon that could shatter the ocean floor and command every drop of water in existence. And for Hades, the helm of invisibility, allowing him to move unseen through any realm, bringing the silent certainty of death wherever he walked. But Zeus wasn't finished. Deeper in Tartarus, he found the Hecatonkires, Cottus, Briareus, and Gyges, each with 50 heads and 100 arms. These beings were violence incarnate, creatures of such overwhelming physical power that even the Titans feared them. They had been imprisoned so long that their rage had crystallized into something pure and terrible. When Zeus offered them freedom and vengeance, their acceptance shook Tartarus itself. Now the real war could begin. Picture, if you can, what this conflict looked like. This wasn't armies clashing on a battlefield. This was fundamental forces of nature turned against each other. When Zeus hurled his thunderbolts, they didn't just strike targets, they tore holes in reality itself. The very sky bled light. Kronos wielded time as a weapon, aging his enemies centuries in seconds, or trapping them in moments that stretched into eternity. But Zeus had youth and fury on his side. He moved like lightning because he was lightning, striking before his father could react. The earth itself became a casualty. Mountains were hurled like stones. Valleys were carved out by the footsteps of giants. The sea boiled when Poseidon's rage met the fire powers of Hyperion. Forests withered and died when Hades passed through them, then bloomed again under Demeter's weeping. The Hecatonkires were perhaps the most terrifying sight on any battlefield in history. Imagine creatures taller than mountains, each with 50 heads, screaming war cries that could shatter stone, each with 100 arms hurling boulders the size of cities. They moved through the Titan forces like children destroying sandcastles, but these castles were divine beings of immense power. For 10 years this continued, 10 years where the sun forgot to rise on schedule because Hyperion was locked in combat. 10 years where the rivers ran backward because Oceanus himself was bleeding. 10 years where time moved strangely in different parts of the world because Kronos was slowly losing his grip on its flow. The mortal world, barely populated in those early days, knew only that the gods were angry. Storms raged constantly. The ground shook without warning. Strange lights filled the sky. The few humans who existed told stories that would be passed down for generations. Stories of the time when heaven itself was at war. The tide of battle shifted gradually. One by one, Titans began to fall or flee. Atlas, mighty Atlas, found himself overwhelmed by the combined might of the Hecatonkires. Hyperion's solar fires were extinguished by Poseidon's endless waves. Even proud Oceanus found his world river turning against him as his nephew seized control of all waters. But the final confrontation was always going to be between father and son. Zeus and Kronos met on a plane that no longer exists, a place that was literally erased from creation by the violence of their final battle. Kronos came wielding the scythe of adamant that had castrated his own father, its edge still sharp enough to cut through divine flesh. Zeus bore his thunderbolt, crackling with the concentrated fury of every storm that had ever raged. They fought for 7 days and 7 nights. The very concepts of day and night became confused as their battle threw the natural order into chaos. Kronos drew on eons of experience, every trick of war and power he had learned in his long reign. But Zeus had something his father lacked, the desperate strength of those who fight for freedom rather than control. On the 7th day, as dawn tried unsuccessfully to break through the chaos they had wrought, Zeus saw his opening. Kronos, exhausted by the endless conflict, stumbled for just a moment. That moment was enough. The thunderbolt that Zeus hurled wasn't just lightning. It was justice given form, the rage of every child Kronos had devoured, the fury of every being he had imprisoned. It struck the Titan king in the chest and burned away, not just his flesh, but his very claim to rulership. Kronos fell, not dead, for gods cannot truly die, but defeated utterly. The scythe of adamant clattered from his nerveless fingers, its edge finally dulled. The war was over. But wars, even divine wars, leave scars. The cosmos itself bore the marks of this conflict. The strange places where reality seemed thin, where time moved differently, where the very air held an echo of divine fury. These were the Titanomachy's legacy. The defeated Titans faced Zeus's judgment. Most were bound in chains forged by the Cyclopes and hurled into Tartarus, that same prison where they had once allowed their monstrous siblings to languish. The irony was not lost on anyone. Atlas received a special punishment. Perhaps Zeus remembered how the giant had once held the heavens aloft in the early days of creation. Or perhaps he simply understood that some punishments must match the crime. Atlas was condemned to hold up the sky itself, to bear the weight of the heavens on his shoulders for all eternity. Every star you see at night, every cloud that passes overhead, Atlas holds them all, a living pillar between earth and sky. But not all Titans were punished. Some, like Themis and Mnemosyne, had chosen neutrality or even aided Zeus. They would find places in the new order that was coming. Prometheus, the forward-thinking Titan, had fought alongside Zeus from the beginning, seeing in the young god a chance for change. As the dust of creation settled, Zeus stood triumphant, but changed. The young god who had entered this war was gone, replaced by someone harder, more pragmatic, bearing the weight of cosmic responsibility. He had learned that ruling the universe required more than just power. It required the wisdom to know when to use that power and when to hold it back. The age of the Titans was ending. The age of the Olympians was about to begin. In the silence that followed the Titanomachy, Zeus stood alone on what had once been the battlefield of the gods. The very air seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what shape reality would take now that the old order had fallen. The cosmos needed healing. 10 years of divine warfare had left wounds in the very fabric of creation, places where time flowed backward, where gravity forgot its purpose, where the fundamental laws that governed existence had been torn like fabric. As the new king of the gods, Zeus faced his first great test, not conquest, but restoration. He began with the earth itself. Gaia, the great mother who had birthed the Titans and orchestrated their rise to power, was strangely quiet. Perhaps she mourned her defeated children, or perhaps she simply waited to see what kind of ruler her great-grandson would become. Zeus approached her sacred places with respect, understanding that even as king of the gods, he owed his existence to her primordial power. "Grandmother," he said, kneeling on ground that still bore the scars of divine battle, "the war is ended. Help me heal what has been broken." And slowly, Gaia responded. Green shoots pushed through devastated soil. Rivers that had been turned to steam began to flow again. Mountains that had been ground to dust reformed, though never quite in their original shapes. The earth was healing, but it would forever bear the subtle marks of the gods' great war. With the physical world stabilizing, Zeus turned to the greater task, dividing the cosmos itself. He called his brothers to him, Poseidon, lord of the seas, and Hades, master of the realm of the dead. These three had been the primary architects of victory, the sons of Kronos who had refused to accept their father's cannibalistic tyranny. Now they would shape the new reality together. The decision they made would define the structure of existence for all time to come, rather than rule as a single, absolute monarch as their father had done. They would divide creation into three great realms. Zeus claimed the sky and the upper air, the realm of weather and storm, of eagles and high winds. This was fitting. He had always been a creature of lightning and thunder, more at home in the wild spaces between earth and stars than in any palace or throne room. Poseidon took dominion over all waters, not just the familiar seas and rivers, but the underground streams, the moisture in clouds, even the blood that flowed in mortal veins. His kingdom was vast and ever-changing, as fluid and unpredictable as water itself. And Hades, perhaps drawing the lot that his brothers least envied, became lord of the underworld and all the dead. Yet this was not a punishment. Someone had to rule that realm, to ensure that the boundary between life and death remained secure. Hades accepted this responsibility with the same grim dignity he had shown throughout the war. The earth itself, they declared, neutral ground, belonging to all three brothers equally. This was wisdom, born from hard experience. They had seen what happened when one god claimed absolute dominion over everything. But Zeus was still the High King, the final arbiter when disputes arose between the realms. The thunderbolt remained in his hand, and his word carried the weight of cosmic law. He had not sought power for its own sake, but someone had to ensure that the chaos of the Titanomachy never returned. The new order needed a center, a place where the gods could gather and the business of ruling the cosmos could be conducted. Zeus chose well, Mount Olympus, a peak so tall it seemed to pierce the very heavens. Here, on the boundary between earth and sky, he established his court. Olympus was more than just a mountain. Under Zeus's power, it became a realm unto itself, a place where the rules of mortal existence bent to accommodate divine presence. Time moved differently here. Seasons changed at the gods' whim, and the very air sparkled with power. Palaces of cloud and starlight rose from its peaks, each more magnificent than anything mortal hands could ever create. Zeus took his place on a throne carved from a single thundercloud, solid as stone but crackling with constant lightning. From here, he could see into all three realms. The earth spread below, Poseidon's ocean stretching to the horizon, and the dim paths that led down to Hades' kingdom of the dead. His siblings gathered around him, Hera, regal even in her youth, whose very presence commanded respect. Demeter, already showing signs of the deep connection to growing things that would define her. Hestia, the gentle keeper of hearth fires, who asked for no throne but was honored above all others. They were the first Olympians, the foundation upon which a new age would be built. But Zeus understood something his father and grandfather had not. Ruling through fear alone breeds only rebellion. The Cyclopes, who had forged his weapons, were not sent back to Tartarus, but welcomed as honored craftsmen. Their forges on Olympus would create wonders for millennia to come. The Hecaton Kairos, Those hundred-handed giants who had been so crucial to victory were given important roles as guardians and enforcers of divine justice. Even some of the defeated Titans found places in the new order. Prometheus, who had sided with Zeus from the beginning, became an advisor and helper to the gods. His gift of foresight, the ability to see what might come to pass, made him invaluable in these early days, when every decision shaped the future of creation. The cosmos began to settle into new patterns. Laws that had been bent or broken during the war reasserted themselves, but with modifications that reflected the new reality. The sun rose and set on schedule again, but now it carried a different quality of light, brighter somehow, as if it too celebrated the end of tyranny. Mortals, those few primitive humans who had survived the chaos of the divine war, looked up at the sky and saw omens of change. The storms seemed less wild, more purposeful. The earth grew more fertile. The very air tasted of new possibilities. But Zeus was not finished. Having established the basic structure of his rule, he turned his attention to the smaller details that would make civilization possible. He decreed laws of hospitality, that travelers must be welcomed and protected. He established the sanctity of oaths, making his own divine power the guarantee that promises would be kept. He set boundaries that even gods would not cross without consequence. This was not the heavy-handed tyranny of Kronos, who had ruled through terror and appetite. This was something new, a system where power was balanced by responsibility, where even the king of the gods acknowledged limits to his authority. The golden age that would follow wouldn't be perfect. No age ruled by flawed beings ever could be. But it would be stable in a way that the cosmos had never known before. Zeus had learned the lessons written in his family's blood, that absolute power corrupts absolutely, that fear breeds rebellion, and that the strongest foundations are built on willing cooperation rather than forced submission. As the first year of his reign drew to a close, Zeus stood on the highest peak of Olympus and looked out over creation. The earth was healing. The seas ran clear and strong under Poseidon's guidance. Even the underworld, under Hades' careful stewardship, had become a place of order rather than chaos. The age of the Titans was truly over. The age of the Olympians had begun. But this was not an ending. It was a transformation. The wild, primal forces that had shaped the early cosmos were giving way to something more complex, more nuanced. Gods who understood not just power, but responsibility. A cosmos governed not by appetite, but by something approaching justice. From his throne of cloud and lightning, Zeus felt the weight of eternity settling on his shoulders. He had won the war, claimed the throne, established the new order. Now came the harder task, ruling wisely, ensuring that the universe he had fought so hard to claim would flourish under his guidance. The cosmos held its breath, waiting to see what wonders and terrors this new age would bring. And there, friends, is where we'll pause in our journey through the ancient myths. Zeus sits on his throne of cloud and lightning, the cosmos spread before him like a vast tapestry waiting to be woven. The war that shook creation is over. The old age of cannibalistic tyranny has passed away. A new order rises from the ashes of the Titanomachy, built not on fear, but on the hard-won wisdom that power shared is power strengthened. We've traveled together from the primordial emptiness of chaos to the establishment of Olympus itself. We've seen the cosmos literally tear itself apart and rebuild in a new image. We've witnessed the rise and fall of titans, the birth of wonders, and the forging of the divine order that would define an age. But our story is far from over. The gods are born, yes, but now they must learn to rule. Zeus and his siblings face the monumental task of governing creation itself, of establishing the golden age that will make Olympus a name whispered in awe across the ancient world. What challenges await them? How will they shape the world? And what new powers and personalities will join them on their mountain throne? All of that awaits us in our next fireside gathering, when we'll explore the age of Olympus. If you've enjoyed this journey through the birth of the gods, I'd be grateful if you'd hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the myths that shaped our world. Your support helps keep these old stories alive and allows us to continue exploring the rich tapestry of human imagination together. The fire in our hearth burns low, and somewhere beyond the circle of its light, the world settles into dreams. Zeus may rule from his throne of clouds, but the stories belong to all of us. Until we meet again around the fire, rest well, and perhaps you'll dream of thunderclouds and starlight palaces, of the time when the very heavens were young and everything was possible.